that
All
never
right.
happened before. Okay. To go back to Glass's question, how I got started in libraries and what I'm doing now. If I had said I was one of those little girls that loved reading books and always loved going to the library and wanted to be a librarian, I was not that person. I I had to volunteer when I was in high school, and I was a little lazy about finding an opportunity. So my mom called the local library, and I started volunteering at my town library. And the director there thought that I started to love reading when I was working and volunteering. So she would leave all these pamphlets in my locker that said, become a librarian, and I would rip them up in front of her, and I was like, no, I'm not going to be a librarian, no. And when I graduated, everyone, it seemed, went for teaching. And so I went to teaching. I followed suit, and I realized I didn't want to be a teacher, and I panicked. I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I was working at the circulation desk, and I was making some reading recommendations. And the patron said, you're really good at this. And I was like, darn it. So I realized that, I liked working at the library, even in high school and college. And so I decided, you know what, I'm going to pursue this. So after college, I went right to library school. I went to Long Island University, and I was still working at the Emerson Public Library. And one day I saw that there was an opening at the New York Public Library. I applied, and I started working at the New York Public Library while I was in library school. And to go from a little small town in Emerson, New Jersey to the Bowery, it was a culture shock from a patron maybe being upset over a little fine to a patron that had a mental illness and was screaming in my face, and learning how to adapt and be able to calm a situation down. And then I came back to the suburbs of New Jersey. I was a children's librarian in Haworth, and then I ended up where I am now at the Ridgewood Library. And I think all the experiences that I had working in a very small library to a big system to another small library, and Ridgewood, we have a population of around 20,000. So I'm kind of in the middle now. And I'm the circulation supervisor. I do reference work, but I'm also the outreach librarian as well. And that's kind of my specialty. I love doing outreach. And I think in order to be a good outreach librarian, I have to be a good reference librarian, because, when patrons come to you and to the library, they're coming to you with their questions, where with outreach, I'm going out there to see what their questions are. So I have to do the reference work inside the library and outside of the library. Oh.
Thank you, Kerri. As the head of circulation, you also you're part of the hiring process when you're hiring or staffing for the circ department. Can you just talk a little bit about what that process is like? I mean, I know it differs per library, but just like, what's it like to sitting on a meeting, or what is it that maybe some questions or answer, like anecdotes maybe that you could say that's what really sets someone apart from another applicant, or anything to that, if you want to speak about that.
Sure. So I do hire staff. I also hire volunteers as well. So even if you're not finding any job opportunities, I do encourage you to volunteer as well. And you might have to interview for that too. But I do mostly I hire part-time staff for the circulation desk. Usually our questions, and my biggest concern is I'm really big on customer service, because at the circulation desk, you are the front face there. I mean, even when you come to our library, most people come in and they pass the circulation desk first. So I want, patrons to feel greeted. I want patrons to feel like they trust us, that, that they're going to get the good information that they need. I know that maybe this person, you're most likely you're going to get the question, how do you handle a difficult situation? And you can answer that in an interview, but it really depends on when you're in that situation sometimes. Like, what is the difficult situation? But to know maybe if someone had an anecdote of how they experienced a tricky situation. Trying to think. When I was hired here, the director's favorite question was, how would you be as a waiter? And I would make a terrible waiter because, you know, I'm not the type of person that could like remember everyone's like orders and write it on a pad. And so I said I would make a better bartender because, you know, when, you know, people go to their local bar, they have their bartender, and, you know, he or she's gonna recommend me something that I've never had before. And I trust this person. And, you know, you see people sitting at the bar telling their stories, telling their days. That's what I want from the library, you know, to have a community that knows that they're welcomed, that they feel comfortable. Definitely how maybe what I also like to do is ask what people are interested in too. Like, what hobbies do you have? Don't be afraid. I always put my hobbies on my resume because you could always, what's great about the library, you can always turn a hobby into a program. So recently I got into bird watching, and we've been doing a lot of different virtual programs. So I created a virtual field trip, and I went to the state line lookout in Alpine, and I was able to show the peregrine falcons, the bald eagles that were just flying by. And so if someone has a really cool hobby and they can turn it into a program, then that's something that I would love to have for my staff. We have someone who really loves cookbooks, and they started a cookbook discussion. So definitely include your hobbies too. And someone that just wants to be at my job, like if they really want the job, you know, and they can even tell me about some of the books that they love, or, you know, not necessarily books, maybe they like TV shows or other pop culture, you know, just be passionate about why you want to be there. That's what I like.
Kerri, you did 2 book clubs, right? Now you do the true crime book club?
I do a true crime book club because I love true crime. Again, use those hobbies. Maybe true crime's a little bit of a creepy hobby, but I think people really love true crime these days. I also do just a general book discussion. During the pandemic, I did a virtual book discussion. So I do quite a lot of, I love book groups. Book groups I think are fun. And actually, sorry to interrupt, in my personal life, because I can never get my friends to start a book group, and I'm a big fan of Reddit lately, and I started a book group on Discord, which is another true crime book group. But I love discussing books, so that's a favorite program of mine for sure.
I feel like you're one of the most avid readers I know, and you read so fast. I'm always impressed by how many books you've read, because I can hardly make it through like one a week.
I can read pretty quickly, but I got stuck on this recent novella. What I like to do is I love talking books with patrons, and if a patron tells me that they really loved a book, I know it's easy to be, oh yeah, I'll check it out, but I really do try to read the books that they recommend. So I read all different types of genres. I'm not stuck on one genre. And this patron recommended a sci-fi novella, All Systems Red by Martha Wells, I think is the author's last name. And I looked it up. It's been getting a lot of awards, and people were talking about it on Reddit. So I said, oh, you know, I think I'm gonna like this. It was 140 pages, and it took me a whole week to read, which is kind of slow for me.
That's really slow for you. You read so quickly. Do you have any advice, since you're a jack of all trades at the library? And we were talking about before we started recording about how Kerri's had to deal with a couple of critters that have come into the library. Is there any advice you can give for dealing with situations that you weren't necessarily prepared for through library school?
Sure, yeah, and that's one of the biggest advice, especially if you're if you're planning to become a reference librarian, and I also, if I didn't make it clear too, I've only really had experience in the public library field. So my biggest recommendation and something to keep in mind, and something I didn't expect when I first started working at the New York Public Library, is I was put on the reference desk right away. And even though I was maybe a week in, when I was sitting on the reference desk, I was considered the person in charge for that day. So I really encourage you to, take some good customer service trainings and courses, and even some management. So you may be the one who, even if it's someone's at the circ desk dealing with a patron that doesn't want to pay their fine, even though you're at reference, you might be the one that has to come down and help that patron out. My biggest advice is, sometimes things can go heated, is to just, sometimes all you need to do is take a breath. And it's okay to start over. Like, if you feel like things are like escalating, the conversation's not going your way, it's okay to be like, you know what, let's just reset here. Let's go back to the beginning, and we're gonna come up with a solution together. And I've noticed that can really help to de-escalate situations a lot. Because if you're getting heated, the other patron's getting heated, it's just not gonna help anyone out. And maybe it's, let me just get my colleague here, maybe he or she has some ideas as well. I've definitely had a range of experiences, not just with animals coming into the library. I've had a patron who was very heated, try to poke a pencil in my face. And, for things like that, it's like, just take a step back. And I've had to call 911 and the police on many occasions. And when you call 911, your heart rate goes up like you wouldn't believe. I've called them enough that I'm okay with it. So just remember, like, anytime you're in a serious situation, is to just take a breath. Now that's, I guess, with difficult situations too. Like, sometimes I'm on the reference desk and I might get a patron, and I sort of have this anxiety of my own, that I think the patron expects that I am going to know the answer right away. So I feel like I'm like rushing to find the right database, the right resource. And I would do that, and it would just ruin my confidence. So I always kind of try to start every reference interview, every reference question as, we're going to do this together. So, and sometimes what I'll do is I'll show the patron my screen while I'm helping them, so that they feel like they're learning something, that they feel like they can trust me. And when they come back, they want to come, not necessarily to me, they want to come back to the library because they know they're learning about the reference experience themselves. I'm trying to think of, yeah, I guess, I hope that answered your question.
And I feel like you've done a little bit of everything at the library, even from the short. We've only worked together 5 years now. I've been there. I forget. I feel like I've been in libraries forever, but it's only been a short 5 years. And you really have dabbled in everything, with doing programming, running the circ department, and then being in reference too. And then you like on the weekends when we're there together, sometimes you're the person in charge of the building.
Yeah. And that's just comes with experience. And I think when you're in library school, I feel like you're naturally curious people. And I just had a really good manager that at New York Public Library that was really big on communication, about making sure that everybody, not just certain departments, knew. Maybe like there was a new procedure in circulation, or maybe there was a different way they were registering the children's department for programs. Everyone knew what was going on. If there was something wrong with the building, everyone had to tell our manager. She would get so upset with us if there was a light bulb out that had been out for a week. So definitely communication is big, and no matter what department. And what I would advise you too, and you're coming straight out of, you're in library school and you're learning about all these databases. And one of the great things that you can do for your job is if you learn about a new database that you really like. I've been out of library school for a long time. If Gladys came to me and said, "Hey, Kerri, do you know about this database?" No, it's such a gem to have employees that are still in library school because they benefit the staff. And I really encourage you, and I would do this when I was in library school. If I learned about a database or a website that was really helpful for staff or for patrons, I would share it with everyone. Don't just, if you know something, don't just hold it to yourself, because it's good for you, but it's not good for anyone else. And you may have a colleague where that website or database could have been helpful to them in helping a patron. We sometimes at our reference desk, not now so much, but we usually have 2 reference librarians on at a time. So if I hear my colleague talking to one patron and I know something that could help them, don't interrupt and be like, no. You can just say, oh, can I add something to that? You want to sort of encourage your colleague, not interrupt and be like, well, I know more than you, but help each other out. I really encourage that for everyone. And kind of brush up on, if you have time on the reference desk and it's quiet, look at different databases and websites, subscribe to email listservs in the library world. I haven't been on Facebook anymore, so I know that people are on the ALA think tank, but I really like the Reddit subreddit for libraries. I think they ask some really good questions and bring up some really good information. I was telling Gladys, there's also Google a Day, because every library is different and all the reference questions that you get are going to be different. So when I went from New York Public Library to Haworth, I might have gotten more like intense reference questions at New York Public Library than I did at a small one. So you kind of lose what you remembered from library school. So I like Google a Day because they'll ask a question that I could be like, oh, I'll look that up and try to use my databases just to keep fresh on, answering reference questions too. Most of our questions these days are, deal with voting, COVID, but we also have some really good questions that are pop culture related. There's this woman that calls pretty consistently who will ask all about Dancing with the Stars. So sometimes you have to read a lot of Entertainment Weekly.
Does anyone have any questions for Kerri, or you can unmute yourselves and ask, or you can pop it in the chat. If not, I was gonna say, Kerri, you could tell, like, I don't know, I feel like there's a lot of strange questions you've probably been asked.
Oh,
or requests for information.
I'm like worried because I see that recording button on.
You could pause the recording.
Well, I don't think it's that bad. So I did have, well, we could learn how to edit it too. So the weirdest question I ever had, and it happened at the reference desk, was this woman called and was asking about circumcision. And I said, oh, are you looking, for like the brisk, a female circumcision? I always ask back. I don't like, you want to get more details from the information. She's like, no, I was at a party and they were talking about circumcisions and I don't know what that is. So I tried explaining to it on the desk, and as soon as, you're saying certain keywords, all the men at the computers, their heads were all popping up like, woo. So that was, I think, a memorable question that I
do have some questions.
Okay.
I don't know if you want to, Allison asked about the Reddit thread that you referenced before. I don't know if you want to.
I can look it up from mine.
And then Johanna asked, what courses were the most valuable in your practice and what did you learn on the job?
Oh, that's a great question. So I think I mentioned before that, like, I love doing outreach. I think it's just one of my favorite things in the world. And I used to work for a few libraries where the directors wanted me to do outreach, but I wasn't allowed to leave the building. So it's kind of strange. And now I think more people are like, yes, get out, go into the community, go to fairs and things like that. And my favorite course that I remember taking in library school was a library marketing class. It's a lot of what the professor taught me then, I still remember now, although some things changed because I think I took that, when did I graduate? Like 2009 or something like that. So, you know, different designs changed, but still the same kind of message. And she was very positive in her approach as well. To, you know, make sure your signage, like there's still some old signs in our library that are all like, no, no. And especially when COVID happened and we were reintroducing people into the library, there were a ton of signs that were just like, no this, no that, no that. And I know a lot of them are necessary, but just to try to kind of bring people into the library in a welcoming way. That's really one of my favorite classes that I took. I also, not necessarily a class, but one of the things that I miss, and New York Public Library stopped doing it, but they used to do this best of reference training every year. And it was one of my favorite. I have saved all the brochures from best of reference because every so often I come across them. Some of the websites are defunct, but I love that idea, and I wish that could happen more often, to just keep yourselves fresh of like all these cool different resources that are available out there. The one course that I wasn't able to take and I really kind of regret, at my class, they had a public library class, and I was like the only one that signed up for it because when I was in library school, it was either archives or a school librarian. I think I was one of the few librarians that were looking for public librarianship, and that class really talked about working with a board, working with your municipalities, and creating a budget. And now, as I'm, you know, developing my career and thinking about going into the world of being a library director, you know, I'm kind of like, oh, I wish I took that class because it's the budget that really scares me. That's
Kerri, can I just, butt in and mention that we have a public library course now at curriculum. It's taught usually by Kay Castle.
Oh, great.
She's at New York Public Library for a long time. She was head of collection development at the New York Library. And previous to that, she had been at the New Jersey State Library. So I really encourage, it's a pretty new course. I encourage all of you, if you're interested in a public librarianship, to take that course.
I wonder if they'll offer it in the fall. I mean, no, spring. I don't know what year it is.
We're just about, Gladys, we're just now working on the spring schedule.
Okay.
If you want it, send a note to Lily. It's much more powerful. You guys probably don't believe this, but I'm actually sort of Lily's boss. But if I say put it on the schedule, she'll say, what do the students think?
Okay. And it's just called public libraries?
Yeah. I think it's called public libraries. I could check on that.
Yeah.
Put it in the chat.
I would definitely encourage you to all take that class.
The funny thing was, I'm in Marie's class on Monday nights, and we talk a lot about signage in the library. And in my other class, we talked a lot about the no's and like, don't do this, don't do that. And so it is interesting that I feel like that's a recurring theme that keeps popping up about signage and how some of them are pretty outdated and you know, they're not as welcoming as you would like them to be.
It's made me also hate Scotch tape. Because it's just, you see all these remnants of past signs on windows and all this Scotch tape everywhere. And, you know, sometimes you want to, like, especially if it's like directory signs in your library, like there's important ones, but sometimes it's kind of like, why do we need that sign? and there used to be this running, maybe it's still the same running joke, like the number one reference question at a library is where's the bathroom? And that's the funniest joke. But to me, it's okay. Like, ask me that question, because then if a person's asking me a directional question, then it helps them to feel more like maybe they're nervous about asking someone a question. Like, if they meet a friendly person that's like, yes, it's right over there. If you need anything else, let me know. Like,
I started working in a library, I would get like anxious about going to ask my question. So I'd have to like formulate it and run it in my head before I like brought it to the librarian, because I didn't want them to think I was asking it like weirdly or said it wrong. So I'd always be like, oh no, I have to like prep my question before I ask it.
yeah, so I think there's some signs. It's like, do we put those signs up because a patron's asking that question too much? Like, that's okay. Like, let them come up to the desk, let them meet their librarian. So I think like that's kind of important to me, is that like making sure that, I mean, we have lots of staff here, but I love it when a patron's like knows me on a first name basis. And it's really not so much that it's I want them to trust me as a staff member. And that's something that you have to trust yourself first and feel confident in yourself. And that's really important for me in my job.
So Jolie also asked a question and said, can you talk a little more about outreach programs in the time of COVID?
Yeah, so it's been really tricky for outreach, mostly because I do a lot of outreach with the senior community, and it was basically a fortress to get into the building. I dropped books off to patrons, and it was really sad for me. And even sadder with that was I lost a lot of my patrons during COVID that I normally did outreach with. So it was very emotional time for me not to connect with the patrons that need the library so much. I also did a lot of virtual outreach with some of the committees that I'm on. I'm on the Stigma Free Committee in Ridgewood. We also have Age Friendly in Ridgewood. So we did some virtual meetings as well. I would also email the contacts that I had. I emailed all of them and said, I know there's not much I could do for you, but what can I do for you? What do you need? And a lot of it was the clients just needed access to even the digital material. There's a boys' home nearby, and the boys needed to read stuff and also use the databases. So what's great about outreach is it also lets you learn how to become more flexible in your job too. Because I learned sometimes when I do outreach events, like specifically when I was working in Haworth, there was a home for, not a home, a school for children from Jersey City and Newark that had learning disabilities. And I learned about the school and I said, oh, is there any programs that I could do with you guys? And they said, we tried, but we've never been allowed to come into the library. And it's so sad that, and I was like, well, of course you can come into the library. So when you're doing outreach, you learn what the barriers are. And so during COVID, doing more virtual outreach, it was just really a matter of just keeping in touch, knowing them that, that I was still there if they needed anything, the library was still there if they needed anything. And, if they needed something, what did they need? So it was tricky. The hardest was, now that I can drop off books, I just have to, I stand next to the DoorDash drivers at the senior homes with my books. So, they just have to come out. But that's really, I really encourage, I don't know if there are outreach courses out there, but that's something that I would encourage taking. Marketing and outreach, I think, is really cool.
Okay, Kerri, we have time for one more question, and then we'll wrap it up. Ali asked, did you have access to any kind of self-care resources for yourself, colleagues to cope with the effects of COVID on the job, or did you get tasked with finding this because you're a reference librarian?
So I actually, one of the first programs that I ran when we shut down was a mental health program. So I do outreach with West Bergen and Ridgewood, and the CFO or CEO, Michael Tizzoli, ran a mental health awareness program. And what was wonderful is my staff went to it, the superintendent went to it. We had such a large audience for it because it was so important. And that video is on YouTube. So it's now a reference tool for us, all the great information that he had. I'm actually meeting with the Stigma Free Committee tomorrow, and I've been working on, before we went into shutdown, I was working on a reference guide for mental health resources, and a lot of it has to change with the circumstances that we're in. So I think I wasn't tasked with it. I put myself into it. I think that's something, you know, when you're on the reference desk or you're in the library, if you see a common question coming up or a trend, like a pandemic, not that we would want to call that a trend, but, you know, try to take those opportunities to like turn it into something, whether it's a program, whether it's a display, or maybe I used to love when I was at New York Public Library making study guides, not necessarily, or like reading guides, like it would have recommended books, but also websites that all connected to each other. So, and I just, you have so many opportunities, be creative, and that's the best advice I can give. And I hope that was okay.
Good. Thank you, Kerri. When we post the talk, can I give out your email in case anyone has any questions or if they'd like to reach you, or
Sure.
Just inundate you with email?
Yeah. Yeah, you can reach me. Gladys can share my Ridgewood account. I'm also on Instagram. If you want to look at my birds, I'll type it in the chat, which I think the chat saves. So
Yeah, I think it.
And you can email me on through Instagram too.
But thank you so much, Kerri. I'll probably see you tomorrow at work.
And hopefully another animal doesn't run into the library.
I think I'm good with the hummingbird.
And I do also, and I want to give also a shout out to Marie Radford too, but because I've taken a lot of your customer service courses at NJLA and through libraries, and I think a lot of what you taught still remnants. My favorite was when you mentioned the window, how if someone's yelling at you, you close the window, but you should really open it and lean in. That's still my favorite. I always think of that when someone's yelling at me. So thank you.
I had another image too. Thanks, Kerri. It's really nice of you to do the shout out. I have another image too of like the boy in the bubble.
Oh yeah.
Really acting out and upset and angry about something. You can think of them as someone in the bubble. You don't have to get in with them and be angry and upset also.
Yeah.
They're having their thing going on. If you can, breathe. What you said, Kerri, was exactly, right. Keep breathing, because that tells your body you're not in a fight and flight. And then just then be empathetic. I'm sorry you're so upset. Have a minute. You could go get them a glass of water. But believe it or not, that really helps.
And also reset yourself with, if it's the same patron and you're like, oh, here's Joe again. If you start off that way, then you're going to already be upset if something escalates. So if Joe is your problem patron, when he comes in, say, hey, Joe, how's it going today? Like, reset yourself every day. And no patron shaming. I'm against patron shaming. I try not to do too many anecdotes where it's like, oh, this happened with a patron. Love your patrons. They're why you're here. So that's my spiel.
Well, thank you, Kerri, for joining us. And thank you, everyone that joined us today, too. We will have another one of these with a school librarian. So keep a lookout for a date for that in November. I don't know if anyone else had anything else to say, Christy, or I think.
I don't have anything to add. Thank you so much, Kerri. This was awesome.
Oh, you're welcome. And sorry about the lighting. It changed even more as it got darker outside. So sorry.
We really do appreciate
you.
that you spent the time today with us. This is wonderful. I'm sure that other people will download the recording and watch.
Oh, great. Yeah, anytime. Feel free to reach out to me.
Thank you, Kerri. Thank you, everyone.
Toodaloo.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.